Good morning, and welcome to the International Conference on Geographical Studies 2021. This year, we are once again holding the conference in a virtual platform, and we have a timely and relevant theme that is geographies of care, lives, specialities, experiences, and practices. My name is Kathy Illustre. I am a member of the PGS Board of Trustees, and I would be the host for the opening ceremonies of the ICGS 2021. During this session, you may use the Zoom reaction to applaud, give a thumbs up, or a heart to our guest speakers so that we can all have some active participation and also show our care and appreciation. The Zoom reactions button is along the same line of tools where you can access the chat box or unmute or turn on your video. So let's try that now. If you are having a special day, please put a thumbs up for your reaction. Or if you can't find the reactions button but still want to participate, please go ahead and type the number 1 in the chat box. So I see a number of attendees with their thumbs up or those who type the number 1 in the chat box. Thank you very much for your participation. For the opening ceremonies, we of course want to extend our warm welcome and care to our conference attendees. And we will do this through a series of welcome messages from the organizers and esteemed guests. To start with the welcome messages, I would like to call the President of the Philippine Geographical Society, Professor Emmanuel Garcia.
Thank you, Ma'am Cathy. We've leveled up from our usual banters during our traditional NCGS. Who would have thought we would go international, much more during a pandemic. A caring morning to everyone. Magandang araw po sa ating lahat. It was in 2005 when the Philippine Geographical Society held its first national conference on geographical studies, or what we call the NCGS. Since then, we've had 9 NCGS, 2 forum on geographical studies, and a joint conference with Ugnayang Pang-Agham Tao. In 2020, we held a virtual NCGS which led to the PGS lecture series. And this year, I am happy to welcome everyone to the very first international conference on geographical studies. ICGS 2021 is a project collaboration with the UP Department of Geography. It showcases 4 plenary sessions, 15 panel sessions, and we have received 47 paper presentations. It is a timely and fitting tribute to the multifaceted aspect of care geographies as we navigate along a pandemic and deal with the precarities of living with the new normal. Through this, we hope to highlight how relations and practices of care are implicated in the production of our everyday geographies. I would like to extend my appreciation to the numerous individuals and institutions who have worked together to bring this conference into fruition, the 2021 ICGS Ad Hoc Committee together with our volunteers, the UP Department of Geography, Social Sciences and Philosophy Research Foundation, or SSPRF, the Philippine Social Science Council, the Asian Geographical Association, and the Junior Philippine Geographical Society UP Diliman. On behalf of the Philippine Geographical Society, thank you all for joining us in promoting and advancing the wonderful world of geography. And as always, I hope we have a very special 2 days of this conference. Ingat.
Thank you, Professor Garcia. I'm sure everyone is looking forward to having a special day today and tomorrow. So the PGS has worked in close collaboration with the UP Department of Geography in planning and organizing the ICGS. As such, I would like to respectfully call on the chair of the UP Department of Geography, Professor Joseph Palis.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you to all the BOT members and most especially the participants for this year's first International Conference for Geographical Studies. What a year we've had in 2021. First, the surge of contagion from an unstoppable plague that enveloped the world and which reconstituted and reframed all imaginable aspects of our social, geographical, and cultural lives. Then there's the ongoing politicalization of local, state, and global governance as regards finding geomedical remedies to the frayed environment pillaged by the current pandemic. It is also in this context where forms of solidarities coalesce and geographies of care and responsibility have taken roots in local and global places, like hybrid mutual aid, food pantries, community gardens, among others that center on producing and sharing food and resources to those who were prevented from having them. The late geographer Doreen Massey would call this nested form as a Russian doll geographies of care and responsibility that are territorial and locally centered. It is in this framework that ICGS 2021 chose this year's theme, Geographies of Care, Lives, Specialities, Experiences, and Practices, as a rallying point to recognize horizontal assemblages among equals through the storying of various struggles and challenges and celebrations and triumphs. The solidarities forged by people to relentlessly work together and for each other with or without official and state sanctioned approvals. The under-rewarded and mostly underappreciated contributions of care workers and medical frontliners who had to fight the systemic violence stemming from the lack of an institutional support system that exposed the vulnerabilities of their own physiological and social bodies. And finally, and by mapping and making visible multiple forms of iterations of care. This conference is a dedication, a tribute, a salute to these forms of care and responsibility, and it's gratifying to see these stories come alive from our plenaries, panel sessions, and paper presentations. Or as anarchist geographer Simon Springer said it is the caring geographies of togetherness that make us who we are, and it is reciprocity that has brought the human journey to the present moment. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Palis, for highlighting activities that express care to our communities. Within the university system, the Department of Geography is part of the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy. As such, it is an honor to introduce our next speaker to give a message this morning. We have a recorded message from the Dean of CSSP, Professor Maria Bernadette Abrera.
Greetings and welcome to the 2021 International Conference on Geographical Studies, organized by the Philippine Geographical Studies headed by its president, Professor Emmanuel Garcia, in coordination with the UP CSSP Department of Geography, chaired by Professor Joseph Palis. The theme for this year stems from the geographies of care to focus on the experiences, initiatives, practices of care. In Filipino, malasakit. It is a concern and a matter of interest to everyone at this particular time of isolation and physical distancing, because intuitively, care involves communion, sharing, a being with. Thus, we associate caring with its physical dimensions and material manifestations. But while geography may mark for us our boundaries and therefore limitations, it should also reflect the totality and the immense possibilities of the human capacity for care. Because the human spirit cannot be confined to the physicality of our borders. Seeing how we are still in the season of remembrance of our departed loved ones, we know that the human spirit cannot be confined within the limits of historical time, because care, or malasakit, pakikiisa, and the highest virtue, pagmamahal, can transcend time and generations and reach beyond the boundaries of space. Therefore, as the young geographers from the department have written recently on the trajectories of geography in Philippine higher education, the discipline of geography continues to transform as its spheres have dramatically expanded and evolved to continually manifest its relevance and potentials. This conference is a manifestation of this dynamic growth of the discipline, and we anticipate the numerous fruits of this conference, both for the discipline and for social sciences in general, so that we may apply them to our communities and societies. Once again, congratulations, and I wish you a very successful conference. Mabuhay!
Truly, the human capacity for care, or malasakit, transcends physical limitations and borders. In organizing this conference, the committee members worked in a virtual space and have shown care to one another and to those with whom we have partnered with in order to bring this conference to fruition. One such organization is the Philippine Social Science Council. It is a privilege to introduce the Executive Director of the PSSC. Please welcome Dr. Lourdes Portus.
President of the Philippine Geographical Society, Dr. Eman Garcia, UP Diliman CSSP Dean Maria Bernadette Abrera, Department of Geography Chairperson Joseph Palis, the hardworking Board of Trustees of PGS and members, Professor Line Vincom, the Vice President of the Asian Geographical Association, where PGS is a member, foreign guests, participants of this international conference, ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant morning to everyone. At the outset, I wish to warmly congratulate the PGS and the UPCSSP Department of Geography for mounting an international conference in the time of pandemic. This is no mean feat, and I must say courageous on your part. As they say, no guts, no glory. Your conference theme, Geographies of Care, Specialities, Lives, Experiences, and Practices, is also novel and very timely for a country like the Philippines that has been severely battered by the pandemic. A most appropriate time when the need for care is at its peak. When I was a kid, I had almost nil knowledge of what geography is. What came to mind whenever I heard the word geography were land, earth, and maps. That's all. Now I am discovering extensive yet unique perspective of geography, a study of what is where, why there, and why care. Little did I know that there are different types of geography: human, physical, environmental, cartography, and within these types are 28 or more major branches. Wow, and daming fields: physical geography, environmental studies, hazards and climate vulnerability research, cultural geography, media geographies. Grabe, and dami. And I did not know all of these diverse fields in geography. It seems like geography permeates all human activities, making the geographer's role crucial to the nation. I did not know that geography is so encompassing, straddling even between the physical and the social sciences. The latter focusing on society and the many social issues such as inequalities, justice, and exclusion. Being a social scientist myself, I know I can see the care being given by geographers to our society. We now recognize the vital role of geographers as scholars and practitioners, and their importance and participation in studying and solving our problems on the environment, climate change crisis, ecological catastrophes, disaster management, the lopsided development in the country, capitalism, and even gender inequality, to name a few. Geography of care, along with cultural ecology and other disciplines, focuses on the relationship humans establish with the natural environment. It concerns the ways in which humans culturally adapt to, use, and modify the environments they occupy. Geographers are particularly interested in what kinds of ecological practices occur within these different cultures. Who is doing what, where, and why? Why care? Geography provides an opportunity to establish the importance of activities in their particular location, as well as in their natural and cultural geographic context. And now, the pandemic will further need this caring discipline of geographers as they explore various ways and dimensions of care seriously in this conference. I am sure the papers that will be presented here will feature different studies showcasing experiences and encounters with COVID-19, analyzing our health system, access to medical services and health facilities, health economics, and livelihoods. I look forward to listen to well thought out, well executed, and perturbing research on caregiving and care geographies. Being a multidisciplinary, and interdisciplinary discipline, geography has developed a network of carers to collaborate and support each other in problematizing and analyzing care for the benefit of communities, societies, and the nation. For these efforts, I say congratulations and thank you for pursuing this path of caring. Before I end, there's another important event that we are celebrating today, and I wish to warmly congratulate PGS for the digital launch of its 2013 to 2014 journal, or volumes 57 to 58. Kudos to the editors, contributors, and Doctors Palis and Garcia. I was a witness to how PGS, a regular member of PSSC, strive hard to keep up and catch with these publications. With the resolve of its officers and editorial staff to update the PGS journal, we will soon see the 2015 to 2020 journal. Is that right, Dr. Palis and Dr. Garcia? This is a daunting challenge to PGS, and I know you will survive it. PSSC will always be here to support your efforts. We are committed to you. Keep up the good work, and mabuhay. Good luck, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Portus, for such a warm welcome message. Ramdam po ang inyong mensahe na mula sa puso. It is also very refreshing to hear about your interest about the discipline of geography. So this conference is a special one, as geographers and those who have an affinity to the discipline, whether here in the Philippines or in places around the world, have come together. In this international gathering, we also have a recorded message from the Vice President of the Asian Geographical Association, Dr. Lai Vin Kam.
College, a friend, good day. My name is Lai Vin Kam, Vice President of Asian Geography Associations. First of all, I would like to say thank you to the organizer for giving me the privilege of addressing this exciting event. For me, it is a great honor and pleasure. On behalf of Asian Geography Associations, I wish to extend my warm congratulations for the openings of the International Conference on Geography Studies and my best wish to all attendants for successful event. Currently, the world is changing rapidly due to the increased human pressure on the Earth's resources and consequent natural crisis. The whole world is witnessing and suffering devastating floods, wildfires, earthquakes, epidemics, and various humanitarian crises. Such disastrous events have brought unprecedented challenges to the global human society. The theme of the conference, Geography of Care, Passions, Life Experiences and Practices, express our discipline as well as our geographical concerns and care towards our planet and our relationships with it. I am confident that this conference will improve the development of caring geographical study and have been a cross-sectors cooperation platform with plenty of concrete outcomes. Also, I would like to share with you some brief information about our communities. Asian Geographical Associations was founded in 2018 by 23 geographical associations across the Asias, and we are pleased to have a Philippines Geographical Society as one of our founding members. Our Asian Conference on Geography aimed at providing a platform for Asian geographers to facilitate their sharing of perspective in geography and relevant fields. I am excited to let you know that the 5th Asian Conference on Geography will be held during 21st to 25th April 2020 in Thanh Nguyen, Vietnam. I look forward to welcome all you in Vietnam. At last, I warmly congratulate you once again on the opening of the ICGS and wish you all great success. Thank you.
It is a wonderful affirmation that the work that our community does actually show care to the planet. And this conference provides a venue to share the output of our work and research. So this is the first year that the PGS is conducting an international event. In previous years, when we were able to meet in person and have large gatherings in the UP Diliman campus, we held a national conference on geographical studies. And the last time that we conducted this was in 2019. At this point, we would like to share a video presentation of the highlights of the NCGS in 2019.
Geography is becoming more known in the social sciences at the moment. From the 1960s, where we had a linguistic and cultural turn and an economic turn, now we are turning towards geography. So welcome, and I wish you a very fruitful conference.
Seeing all of us here and celebrating with us the 2 days in the year when we can freely talk about geography without as much as having to define what it is or having to explain what geographers do makes all the hassle and stress all worth it. And it is really a momentous occasion for Philippine geography for several reasons. First, I am happy to share with you that this year marks the 69th year of the Philippine Geographical Society. 69 years of popularizing and making geography known in the country. I know that there's so much more potential to explore, but to realize the role that geography plays in our society today, I am sure our founding members would have been happy seeing us all gathered today and celebrating geography as it is now in the Philippines.
Based in nation building.
Those in legal state. These non-citizen others have
Different from our own.
modified and studied.
Experience the sound, the feel. The various thematic sessions are broad and dispersed, all converging into the domains of creativity, criticality, and thoughtfulness. We expect participants to attend as many sessions as they can and to contribute to the lively discussions following all presentations. We hope that we can translate our encounters at the NCGS into meaningful and productive academic connections via the plenary.
So, situation of disaster.
Ito dapat survey natin.
That meaning organization
Disaster.
market, but
After seeing what happened in the previous conference, let's now explore what this conference is all about and how we are expected to interact and participate in this virtual gathering. For this, please welcome one of the coordinators of the ICGS, Mr. Fernand Francis Hermoso.
Good morning, everyone. Maayong buntag. My name is Fernand Francis Hermoso, as mentioned by my colleague, Professor Cathy. This international conference on geographical studies is indeed a unique one, as we have fully embraced the online environment while going international. As such, to make the most out of this online conference, there are a few things that I would like to walk you through. First, the basic house rules. We would like to ask you to please keep your mics on mute to avoid unnecessary background noise during our discussion or sessions. Next, our plenary sessions are simultaneously streamed in the UP Department of Geography YouTube channel. Next, you may send your questions and we can utilize our Zoom chat box for any questions or concerns. And lastly, the sessions will be recorded for documentation purposes. Please also take note that if at any time you get disconnected from the main session, you can always rejoin using the same link. Next, for our program. ICGS will be a two-day conference which will include 4 plenary sessions and 5 parallel panel sessions. Again, the plenary sessions will be streamed via the YouTube channel of the UP Department of Geography, while the panel sessions will be recorded. For the panel sessions, please take note that we will be utilizing Zoom breakout rooms. You can choose which parallel sessions to attend to by joining that breakout room. If ever you will encounter problems joining the parallel sessions or will be having difficulties moving from one room to the other, you can always refer to our volunteer students and organizers to assist you. The schedules of parallel sessions, as well as the sessions in progress, will be posted in the main room to help guide you. You can also use the chat box in case you have questions to the speakers or any concerns both in the main room as well as during our breakout sessions. And lastly, the highlight of the second day is the PGS General Assembly. The 2022 Board of Trustees will be elected during the assembly. As such, we are encouraging all members in good standing to attend the assembly and participate in the election. Members in good standing are those members who have submitted membership forms and have paid the membership fee. Please take note that the conference fee will serve as your membership fee for the upcoming year. Also, the Junior Philippine Geographical Society will be facilitating the election. Nomination will be from today until 1 p.m. of November 5. For more information on the nomination process, we will be providing you a link later. You will be continuously updated as the conference progresses. So thank you, everyone. Wherever you may be attending this conference, we hope that you are doing well. Remember, PGS cares. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hermoso, for sharing about how we can make the most of our experience in attending and participating in this conference. And that concludes the opening ceremonies of the International Conference on Geographical Studies. Thank you for your attendance in this session, and I hope that you would enjoy the two-day gathering that showcases the experiences and practices of geographies of care. The next part of the program is the first plenary session. I would like to introduce the moderator of the plenary session. He is the chair of the Department of Geography and a member of the PGS Board of Trustees. Please welcome Professor Joseph Palis.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And I hope everyone is finally settling in. It is my great pleasure, honor, and privilege to introduce our speaker, Dr. Scott Kirsch. Not only was he my dissertation supervisor, but he has been a good friend ever since. Scott Kirsch is a professor of the Department of Geography at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He is a cultural, historical, and political geographer, and his research interests include technology, landscape, 20th century U.S. imperialism and geopolitics in the Philippines, in Asia-Pacific nuclear landscapes. Also, history of science and geographies of war and peace. He is the author of the book Proving Grounds, Project Plowshare, and the Unrealized Dream of Nuclear Earth Moving. And with Professor Colin Flint, he's editor of this Routledge publication entitled Reconstructing Conflict, Integrating War and Post-War Geographies. He's actually currently and almost finished with his book, writing about the American colonial spaces in the Philippines, the Insular Empire, and his research has been published in the Annals of the American Association of Geographers, Antipode, the Geographical Journal, Journal of Historical Geography, Philippine Studies, Historical and Ethnographic Viewpoints, Society and Space, among other journals. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Scott Kirsch.
Thank you, Joseph. And thank you, everybody, for being here. It's nice to be here. Mabuhay. And thank you to the Philippine Geographical Society for inviting me to speak. I'm honored to be part of this plenary session and the conference with the theme of Geographies of Care, in part because during my 2 visits to the Philippines, I was treated with such great care by the Department of Geography at UP. And so special thanks to Professor Paulis for that. First, finding me a bus seat on a student field trip to Baguio, my only chance to visit there at the time, but leaving me to discover only later that we would be leaving at midnight and would be surfing by 8 a.m. in San Fernando. And second, for the department allowing me to sit in on a number of departmental events where I've never really encountered so much food per capita as I did at those faculty meetings. But it's especially gratifying to be able to share the results of this research with you that is about the interrelations of the US and the Philippines, which shaped both countries. Although that said, turning to the conference theme of the objects of care to which it speaks are material objects in my paper: roads, bridges, culverts, surfacing materials. And the practices of care that I look at are also matters of politics. So it might be a sort of offbeat start for looking at practices of care, but I hope it'll be interesting, and I hope I can answer your questions in following the talk, which is about half an hour. I'm going to share my screen with you now. And all right, so making a moral road atlas. Between 1907 and 1913, the US insular government in the Philippines boasted the construction of 1,000 miles of first-class roads across the archipelago. While every mile rendered in maps and statistics could be celebrated as evidence of material progress under American governance, each was also the product, more directly, of untold hours of backbreaking and often dangerous human toil, much of it coerced through a variety of means by the US Army, Philippine Constabulary, and local elected officials. As then Secretary of Commerce and Police Cameron Forbes, who you see in the lower left, would emphasize in what he called his road Bible of the Philippines, roads were also products of care, and his Caminero system of road maintenance, wherein properly graded and durably surfaced roads were, quote, guarded from hour to hour by roadmen to see with jealous eyes that no sign of deterioration is allowed even to appear, articulated a colonial policy requiring its ongoing support. Forbes's campaign also linked the Philippine roadwork to increasingly centralized regimes of government inspection, which are the focus of this talk. Today, I wanted to share a few tidbits from my book project, American Colonial Spaces in the Philippines, which I hope to complete early next year and will publish in Routledge's Research in Historical Geography series. It's primarily an archive-based study that tells the story of a regime of US colonial retentionists that attempted to build an enduring empire in the Philippines through the production of space. From concrete interventions in infrastructure, urban planning, and built environments, to more abstract projects of mapping and territorialization, the book traces the efforts of US government agents to transform the Philippine landscape and space economy. Focusing mainly on the period from 1900 to 1913, when the governing Taft-Forbes regime occupied the upper echelons of the insular government and instituted key elements of these spatial policies. Drawing on and elaborating notions of the production of space associated with the Marxist philosopher Henri Lefebvre, the book traces the production of four kinds of colonial spaces, which you see highlighted in the chapter outline: territory, map, landscape, and road. And of course, it's the fourth that I'll be concentrating on today, but each were geared in different ways to make space for American empire in the Philippines, and some hoped to help ensure its survival for a few generations at least. Of course, the elite American colonials who sought to fashion these spaces were by no means acting alone. Consider, for example, the everyday labor required to build and maintain roads and bridges, or the efforts of elite Filipino families on whose support insular officials relied to co-opt US policies as a means of entrenching their own local and national power. Still, it is Cameron Forbes that is the chief protagonist of my story. As Forbes jotted in his journal in 1908, I have written a letter which I'm going to have translated into all the dialects and sent to every municipal president, provincial governor, engineer, and road foreman in the islands on the necessity of roads and what has been done. The 13-page circular, Forbes anticipated, would be the road Bible of the Philippines, articulating a politics of material development while positioning good roads as a technical matter and beyond politics in a normal sense. It also provided for Forbes a signature issue on his journey to the governor's mansion at Malacañang. The extraordinary letter, printed and distributed to 31 provinces 2 weeks later, emphasized the, quote, very lamentable condition of Philippine roads and the necessity of both expanding and better maintaining the roads if, quote, these islands were to expect any real measure of prosperity. Like his mentor, Secretary of War Taft, Forbes largely blamed Filipino municipalities for declining road conditions. But the question now was what was to be done under US rule. The answer was what Forbes described as a complete change in the system of road construction and maintenance, one which will provide not only for the construction and repair of all necessary roads, but their continuing maintenance thereafter. The plan, known as the Caminero system, also called into being new practices of inspection by Forbes and Department of Public Works engineers, constructing what I will call a moral road atlas, equating good roads with good government and poorly cared for roads with moral and political failings, and perhaps fireable offenses among local officials. So, El Caminero. Known perhaps apocryphally as El Caminero, or the roadman, Forbes would help to mobilize the insular government around road construction as a self-consciously modern colonial development policy, yet often in ways that threw the contradictions of his liberal imperialism into sharp relief. If for some, the desired solution to the problem of inadequate labor on the roads had included subcontracting of Chinese labor gangs, then for Forbes, a policy of expanded road building throughout the archipelago would produce more voracious labor demands, and he called for more systematic and politically acceptable solutions, including experimentations with different forms of coerced or unfree labor. The Boston Brahmin's diffuse bureaucratic portfolio, which in addition to road building and public works included the administration of ports and harbors, railroads, lighthouse service, post office, business franchising, and prisons allowed him to pursue a range of strategies to address the labor problem. In this, Forbes drew on the contemporary discourse of good roads in North America, where the deployment of convict labor was becoming a key element in the roads movement, and the chain gang, composed primarily of African Americans imprisoned for minor crimes and deployed to the roads, was emerging as the dominant penal institution in the American South. That this brutal regime of convict labor could be cast as a progressive enterprise, modernizing the road network while offering supposedly healthful outdoor work for prisoners under the benign control of the state, made it an appealing ideology for road builders as well as for rural landowners, and might account for Forbes's exuberance over the possibility of using prisoners for Philippine road work. By March 1905, he had begun to make use of the prisons as a source of workers, and the circulation of prisoners to road sites across the archipelago had become something of a pet project. As you can see in this quote, as Forbes tallied their movements in his journal, rushing off more prisoners, 250 to Albay, which makes 500 on that road, and the full complement, more going down to Mindanao under the US Army and General Wood. All of these things, 1,360 in all moved, he was happy to report. But the numbers still would not add up to satisfy the labor demands for roads and other public works that Forbes hoped to produce across the archipelago. By cultivating collaborators on the provincial boards, however, Forbes would seek to secure more durable solutions to the problems of funding and labor for road work, and to develop what he saw as a perfect permanent system of road construction and maintenance. The 1908 Road Bible thus arrived at a propitious moment. Complaining that in turning over maintenance of the roads to the provinces and municipalities, quote, no definite system or rules for maintenance and construction had been established, Forbes tacitly acknowledged that the expansion of roads had outpaced maintenance, leaving crucial work in the first years of construction unsupported. As a result, bridges and culverts had been left exposed to torrential rains, ungraveled and, quote, not cared for. Many would rapidly deteriorate. Old Spanish roads had been allowed to fall into disrepair and were frequently impassable during rainy seasons, choking commerce. Whole provinces, Forbes conceded, had retrogressed. But the Caminero system would solve the problem through what Forbes expressed as a perfect scheme of maintenance and inspection. Under the Caminero plan, adopted by the provincial boards, strong-armed into adopting it, I should say, under a resolution tied to the double cedula or registration tax, which also compelled workers who couldn't afford the 3 peso tax to serve 10 days on the roads working. First-class roads were divided into sections of care under a capataz, then further divided into subsections, averaging 2 miles of roadway, 1 during the rainy season, that could each be maintained properly by a single caminero, who is responsible for the good conditions of that section. Linking the insular and provincial levels of government to the everyday work of camineros, as well as the materials with which the roads were to be maintained, each caminero was provided with a badge to indicate his office, giving the name of the province, the name of the road, and the number of the section. He is given the necessary tools and implements, and he is to live in a house adjoining his subsection and to spend the whole of his time on the road work. At stated distances along the road, there are to be deposits of road material approved by the district engineer, and no material except such as thus deposited can be used on the road. The caminero thus has the means at hand to properly look out for the reasonable wear and tear of the road. While extraordinary events, frequent washouts during monsoon season, would still require more substantial road clearance and rebuilding efforts, the system was built around the individual geographically distributed responsibilities of the caminero, each tending their own stretch of first-class road. So it goes on, it is his duty to keep the vegetation from encroaching, to keep the ditches and culverts clear so the water can run off, to keep the surface of the road crowned so the water will not lie in the road, to fill all the ruts and depressions in the road with broken rock or other approved material, and on until he will protect the road from misuse and keep it continually in good condition. At an estimated cost of 350 pesos per kilometer per year, the system would save 3 to 4 times that, Forbes insisted, through preventative maintenance. But while the micro-territorial figure of the Caminero was pivotal to Forbes's vision of good roads and good government, the provinces would still require the work of road crews and rock crushers, along with technological investments in steamrollers and traction engines to carry out much of the ongoing surfacing and crowning of roads and clearance of debris. Linking road maintenance to increasingly centralized regimes of inspection under the Bureau of Public Works, the Caminero system was also associated with efforts to replace provincial supervisors with district engineers, who, Forbes proposed, would make a complete examination of first-class roads in every province every 3 months, with less frequent inspection required for second and third-class roads. Establishing a system of ledgers for each section of road, detailing in cold, hard figures the conditions of roads, bridges, and culverts, and circulating their reports up the chain of authority, ultimately reaching the Governor General himself with their recommendations for, quote, any action as may seem necessary. Forbes argued that the road inspection system under the Bureau of Public Works should provide a means not only of observing not only local practices of road maintenance, but also the provincial and municipal officials in charge. The policy should be adopted, he writes, that any governor or any other provincial official or municipal president or any officer of the government charged with the maintenance of the road who allows it to deteriorate when he could have maintained it should be summarily removed from office and somebody else appointed who will more properly perform the duties with which he is charged. Envisioning a world in which each local presidente and provincial governor might, quote, make himself a name for good administration by devoting a sufficient part of his energy to the problem of good roads in his district, the Caminero system, Forbes hoped, would be both disciplinary and punitive. As Forbes put it in a letter to President Taft prior to Forbes's inauguration as Governor General in 1909, the one essential prerequisite to success in any form of government is material development, as providing the sinews of society. I believe it is easier to divert their minds from political matters by giving them something to think of than by entering into arguments with them for the purpose of refuting their statements or by making promises which I am not in position to fulfill. So it was not independence, Forbes insisted, but ports, harbors, bulkheads, and the expansion of agriculture along navigable rivers that would produce happy and prosperous people in the Philippines. To the Filipinos, he says, turn your undivided attention to the material development of your country and rest confident of the good faith of the United States. Critical among these paths to material development, quote, and supplementary to all of these are the roads, and in the present progress of the work in connection with roads, I find the most happy augury for the future success of the Philippine people. Forbes emphasized the use of durable materials and the effect of permanence, which, as the historian Paul Kramer has described, set the purported Americanness of built environments apart from native counterparts in the landscape. But the materiality of roads, particularly in tropical environments, was not something permanent. Rather, maintaining the roads required near constant vigilance, including new labor practices as well as new modes of territoriality and subjectivity. The government buildings and bridges should always be of reinforced concrete. The roads should be built upon strong foundations with durable surfacing and guarded from hour to hour by roadmen to see with jealous eyes that no sign of deterioration is even allowed to appear. Although the punitive elements of road surveillance that Forbes had advocated, wherein local officials could be dismissed by the Governor General for failing to keep up standards, these did not gain traction in Philippine law. The power dynamics of insular inspection persisted in flexible and informal relations of power. As Governor General, Forbes would engage in a relentless, geographically distributed charm campaign, personally directing inspection tours across the archipelago that, by his own estimate, should occupy 1/3 of the time of the Governor General's time in office, often carried out at a breathtaking pace of travel. In these expeditions, to which we turn in the next section, Forbes wielded both the carrot and the stick of colonial rule, while in his journals constructing a moral topography that coupled material development, particularly as embodied in road maintenance, with human achievement. For Forbes, the regular inspection of roads and other public works, which included visits to jails, schoolhouses, constabulary stations, hospitals, and other facilities, continued after his appointment as Governor General, even as the pomp and politics of local visits, including a wave of ceremonies for the inauguration of new bridges, increased alongside the tours of inspection, featuring usually an array of performances such as children's folk dancing and sporting exhibitions, including basketball and baseball games, with Forbes himself often participating in the latter. A busy schedule of speeches, banquets, private dinner parties, and fancy balls was often articulated with the inspection visits. And while Forbes liked to complain of the endless Filipino courses that left him, quote, Fletcherizing at a banquet with 6 kinds of meat and 3 of fish, he evidently saw the social events as critical to the road campaign, through which he hoped to establish this more permanent basis for continued road building and maintenance programs. Now, the inspections mattered to Forbes. That is, he cared deeply about what he observed on these tours, but he also saw what he wanted to see. In Negros, for example, where Forbes observed a veritable enthusiasm for road and bridge building, he inaugurated 2 new bridges, quote, great noble structures of reinforced concrete. Later, he read in the landscape a noble new road connecting Nueva Vizcaya to Isabela in northern Luzon, an epic-making event for both provinces. After a 1911 visit to Mindanao, there seemed no limit to Forbes to the possibilities of road building, which functioned as both a producer and an indicator of progress. Creeping slowly, mile by mile, year by year, opening up a world of wealth, waiting only for the opportunity that this road brings to be useful to mankind, order and happiness, and progress and wealth follow, and poverty, misery, superstition, and danger to life and limb flee before it. Little by little, this road will branch out and connect up till the whole of the wonderful island of Mindanao is netted with roads, and its area, great as Indiana, becomes as orderly and available as places many times more populous and productive. If only we can be left alone here and the present policy be allowed to get crystallized before it is taken out of the creative hands that are now bringing it to maturity. Forbes's retentionist claims were explicit, but his drive to make his colonial subjects see road development the way he saw it, and to bring these views of a landscape of first and second class roads to reality, remained a tenuous endeavor. Those with a stake in the matter, those who we can presume saw in road building a means of consolidating their own profits and power, tended to agree. Still, Forbes was wary of superficial cooperation on the roads policy and was incensed when he detected feigned busyness on the roads during inspections or overly last-minute preparations. And he relished his own capacity by interviewing local observers for seeing through such traps of appearance. And the failure of leaders to adequately maintain the roads was viewed as a serious character flaw and an explicit rejection of the territorial bargain and moral economy of colonial development. At Cagayan province, for example, Forbes found, quote, the roads here, as is to be expected with a weak governor, are in the worst condition of any we've seen. Such moral geographies, often racialized, were sometimes read into crude physiognomies, as when Forbes described a delegation from Tayabas who visited him to complain of their local presidente. They charged him with graft in which they initiated collusion on the part of the provincial governor, a mean, weak-faced looking man named Lopez, whom I excoriated a day or two ago for letting his roads get into disrepair. In contrast, Pampanga was a good province, wherein Colonel Blanco, tall, handsome, and a mestizo, an erstwhile Spanish citizen, informed Forbes that the road over which we traveled was now passable for the first time in 40 years at this season, and we crossed 3 streams over new steel bridges just completed. Though typically in his journal entries, Forbes found fault with Filipinos who had allowed roads to fall into disrepair, severe judgments were not limited to Filipinos. Visiting the Pagbilao-Atimonan Road in Bicol, Forbes confided to his journal that he was disgusted with the whole thing. Another example of outrageous incompetence on the part of the Bureau of Public Works prior to his own appointment. Here he recalled Vogelsang, the engineer, paid for his foolishness with his life, as a slide on the mountainside up which he was putting his road buried him alive, or killed him as it struck him, I don't remember which. But the punishment was by no means too severe for the offense, for the road was in the wrong place, with sharp curves and grades, and there are good routes to be found by going after them. He was equally parsimonious in his efforts to discipline Filipino provincial officials who did not meet their road building expectations. As he once played hardball with the leaders of Ilocos Sur, in short, I told them that if they failed to build and maintain roads, all public works in the province would be discontinued by public order immediately. And we can presume surely that this was not the only time that Forbes issued such a threat. Surely, provincial officials were quick to grasp the implicit messages of Forbes's road inspection regime, or at least to tell him what he wanted to hear. Recounting a conversation at a party hosted by Governor Tinio of Nueva Ecija, Forbes noted that Tinio had said he wished that I had become governor before, because from what he could see of the road work, it was the life of the people. He said he'd been watching it, how it worked in the provinces. By September 1911, Forbes could describe, in a letter to new US Secretary of War Henry Stimson, an extended general inspection model geared toward a thorough overhauling to the administration of the provinces on the spot. The inspection tour was ambitious, including in Forbes's entourage members of the Philippine Commission and bureau chiefs who worked in the provinces or their assistants. Forbes commandeered the cable ship Rizal as the inspection tour's base of operations, thus cutting out what Forbes now viewed as, quote, excessive entertainments and receptions. Turning the geography of territorially defined representative democracy inside out, in a sense, Forbes attempted to innovate through the inspection new ways for the insular government to travel to the people. Though it is not clear that any formal powers were bestowed on the general inspection, Forbes continued to exercise proconsular powers on the tours, including visits to local jails in which Forbes often met with prisoners about their cases and experiences in the justice system. Forbes sometimes offered clemency to a host of prisoners awaiting trial while denying it to others. While the general inspection functioned in some ways then as an imperial fantasy of power, the social relations it engendered or reproduced were nonetheless real. And yet the dynamics of power were largely informal, transactional, and relational. It is astounding what a hold my policy of road construction has taken on the people, Forbes observed, noting that petitions for additional roads and structures were often presented to him during the visits. The next month, after viewing excellent roads and lovely country on the way to Nueva Cáceres as an indicator of the rectitude of governing officials, Forbes was delighted to encounter popular enthusiasm for road building in a public session in which orators declared for roads and roads and roads, insisting with oratorical vehemence approaching passion on their absolute necessity for the life of the people. The province has more roads per capita than any other and has done better in the matter of roads than almost any other, which shows that the road movement is sure to gain headway by reason of its own success, as the more roads people have, the more they want. Such support was not universal, however. Responding during a 1910 visit by Secretary of War Dickinson to a conference held yesterday with the boys of the press following his inspection of Philippine roads with Forbes, in which Dickinson had insisted that, quote, the main thing for the country is good roads, which facilitate commercial exchange and its progress. The newspaper El Ideal objected to the priority that roads had been afforded by Dickinson and in the insular budget. Given conditions of economic crisis in the archipelago, the anonymous editorial asked, why were roads the country's main necessity? While the article allowed that the governor and secretary of war were acting in good faith, it questioned the belief, quote, that in the Philippines, the opening of a good path or the laying of some iron line can produce the same miracles as in the US, where capital, always alert, brings prosperity to open points of traffic. For if the roads policy was a safe investment for, quote, rich villages, the outcomes of road building in advance of material prosperity for a people poor like ours were more dubious, indicating an error of principle. There's a factor in the box. What should have been first, what should have been the last, has come first. The matter of who stood to benefit from Forbes's road movement was, like a host of other matters of colonial policy, a socially and geographically uneven question. So if I may conclude somewhat abruptly, I would, first of all, like to thank you all for your attention. And second, to acknowledge that in some ways, what I've offered is an obscure understanding of geographies of care as maintenance and upkeep presented in this talk, in which care for roads is understood as a relation of labor and obligation and a terrain of discipline and politics. But then on second thought, maybe these qualities are not so obscure. Thank you. Mabuhay.
Thank you very much, Scott, for that always wonderful historical look at the geographies of the Philippines. And certainly there are real life and contemporary parallels with what we have right now under the present dispensation. At this point, I will now open the floor for questions or comments. You can also leave your questions or comments at the Zoom chat, and we can ask Dr. Kirsch some of your questions. There's one comment actually, Scott, for you here. Oh, actually, let me start with the one that asked this question. Did Forbes talk about any road projects in Visayas and in Mindanao from your the archival data that you gathered?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Did Forbes talk about road projects in Visayas and in Mindanao?
In Mindanao, it was until 1913, of course, under the Army jurisdiction. And so while it was mentioned in this talk that he was sending prisoners down there to work on the roads, they were requested by General Leonard Wood. So it was the Army that was managing them in Mindanao. And interestingly, though, Forbes thought of that program as a kind of model that where the Army could act with fewer constraints that he felt the insular government had to act. In the Visayas, I'm going to have to go back to my map and see. I think it was not as active during the period that I'm looking at, but I'll have to look more closely. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. There's actually a comment before I'm going to ask another question, but it says here that the Caminero sounds like today's privatized operators for toll roads and bridges. President Duterte has been known for the build policy, and there were a lot of clear parallels between what Governor Forbes did before and the present dispensation. Let me. Do you want to comment on that, Scott?
Well, it's interesting that they're privatized now, and yet it's sort of the similarity of the single Caminero, maybe, though I'm not familiar with this system, is interesting in some ways in that it kind of denies the social relations of work, right? The single person assigned to the stretch of highway. But for Forbes, it would not have been private. It was precisely a model of governance. Right. So he wanted it to, that the public nature of it was to him kind of meant to set an example to the people. That you notice the one quote I had where the Caminero is given a badge, right? It meant to kind of instill pride in his section of road. So it was, you know, maybe the new version is more the neoliberal context.
Yeah. There is a question here. Did the care for roads result in the negligence of our existing waterways as a means of transportation, as it is evident today? Can you comment on that, maybe? Or
you know, that's a good question, and I'm not sure. I think it wasn't that Forbes chose either. He wanted to put as much resources as he could into roads, into harbor renovations, into new port facilities. You know, he wanted to put the cart before the horse of capital development by having this kind of network of infrastructure. On the other hand, if you actually look to kind of what was socially necessary, would it have made more sense to invest more heavily in ship lines and port facilities more? Maybe so.
yeah. Scott, there's another question for you here. Was Forbes instrumental in the construction of roads that lead to Baguio and the Cordilleras? And yeah, maybe that first question. There's a follow-up question there, though, but I'm just going to ask that later on.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Forbes was, that road was started in advance of Forbes. And so he arrives in the fall of 1904. And in fact, they've already had some disastrous decision-making on those roads that the Benguet Road, of course, the
Right.
Kennan Road now, which only later did they acknowledge some of these problems in the decision-making. But so that was underway, and he was involved to the extent that when he arrived, he helped to throw as much resources as he could behind it. And was very sold on the idea of the summer capital and having this kind of elite place for Americans to, in particular, to withdraw to. Unlike some of his colleagues, he was very eager to get elite Filipinos and government workers on board with this as well, to have their support. But I think this also affected him for the somewhat later period that I talked about today of the Road Bible, of trying to expand across the islands, because he was sort of bruised by charges of that he was just providing this road to Baguio for the Americans, and he wanted to prove that it was you know, a nationwide endeavor.
Mm-hmm. Are you going to include that in your book also, Scott? I mean, I remember you showing me some pictures of the Kennan Road construction in the early years that you got from maybe from the archives.
Yeah, I do have, it is part of this chapter that I didn't talk about today, the whole Benguet Road story, which is where they got a lot of the ideas of how to manage the labor on the road. But there are some incredible pictures that I'm hoping will be printable of people on these kind of spindly ladders, hundreds of feet up a sheer rock face, chipping away with hand tools and placing dynamite inside to clear a bench or a roadway for these wonderful roads that we're able to drive up to Baguio now, unless you get caught behind a landslide and in a traffic jam, as I believe we did one time.
Yeah. The second question actually was kind of connected to the first one about Baguio and the Cordilleras. In taking care of the roads, were they the ones that instituted planting of acacia trees? These are rain trees along the roadside. Would you?
I really do not know. That's on the Kennan Road as well?
I believe it is, right, Burns?
Hello, Sir Joseph. Good morning from Manila, Dr. Spurge. Thank you very much for accommodating the question. Actually, this is about the Manila North Road, the Manila South Road, these roads that span from Manila all the way to the provinces of Luzon and the Visayas. If you go to UP Diliman or you go to places like Taft Avenue during the American colonial era, you will notice that most of the roads that have been most of the roadsides have acacia trees or rain trees, and according to some of the studies, these were instituted by the Americans because of the heat and the tropical heat. So I am just you know having a confirmation whether this was really a landscaping a landscaping policy of the American insular government, since during the Spanish colonial government, not much has been seen about roadside trees, but it is during the American colonial era that there were a lot of plants, or there were a lot of trees that have been planted roadside to make it as a cover. And it's pretty it is also controversial, since most of the roads right now here in the Philippines are being widened by the Public Works Department. And for some of the people, they look at these acacia trees or rain trees as heritage, but they're not really sure whether if it came from the Spanish colonial or the American colonial era. So I think Sir Joe, that's more of a comment or and then the question as well. Thank you, Dr. Kirsch, and thank you, Sir Joe.
Thank you for that question. And I'm very curious actually to study that further, in part because Forbes does not mention the acacia trees, which, I mean, he discusses a lot in his journals. There's few thoughts that go unshared in his journals. So it makes me wonder if maybe that element came in after he left in 1913, but it's certainly worth looking into further on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Scott, there's a question here for you. I'm just gonna jump right ahead and ask this other question before I go back to the more historical question. But can you comment on this? But what were the narratives of indigenous people during the time who were affected by the road construction?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and it is a lacuna of this paper, really, and it is a historical lacuna as well, because how can you recover that information? There are some secondhand reports from U.S. government officials that tally the number of nations or the indigenous people that were often compelled to the roads by the constabulary in large numbers for a few weeks at a time. So I have not uncovered their stories, and part of my own epistemological limits is that I'm not really able to. However, some stories that do come through that you only hear secondhand through the government are quite disturbing and haunting. One of them, or actually two similar circumstances, involved a group from a village that were somewhere in northern Luzon, and I can't remember which province, but were taken to work in other places, then working on the roads, contracted illnesses which were contagious, and then brought it back to their villages, and it spread from there, right? So these work camps, especially the Benguet Road, which had larger work camps, could be sites of contagion themselves and lead to this kind of, just the worst kind of misery through government forced labor. So I try to allude to some of these stories and show that they exist, but at the same time, I'm not able to tell them from the experiential side.
Yeah. Let me just comment on that also, Scott, because I think that's this lacuna that you were saying is also a kind of data gaps that most historical geographers also experience or encounter when they do research something and similar to this, especially since most of the accounts may have come from the Americans. So it seems to also erase certain kinds of narratives that could have been narrated by the indigenous people because it wasn't deemed as important, or it wasn't just documented well enough. But it's interesting to also probably look into these kinds of historical tracks that will give us a fuller picture of how this road became a product of so many other people other than those people that he mentioned in his book, in his report. There's a question here. I'm not sure if this is something you may have direct knowledge of, but in what ways did Forbes' representation of space differ from, say, Spanish Governor General Pascual Enrile A. Cedo or other Spanish infrastructurists in the 19th century? Do you have any comment on that?
I can't speak to that specific figure. The general American pattern was to denigrate anything that was a legacy of the Spanish as inadequate and as a way to build up the achievements of the US. But on the roads and trails, they were often going directly from the remaining Spanish infrastructure, which had also gone through waves of expansion and retraction. So it was a sort of narrow fence that he had to walk on, of not crediting the Spanish too much, and yet he was kind of working over that template of roads. So how much did it differ? I mean, they threw a ton of resources into these roads, and in a very short time in that first decade of the 20th century, the first 2 decades, really. So I think it differed in terms of the amount of effort and labor system, but of course they also borrowed the corvée labor tax from the Spanish. So it's yet another thing that was really drawing on the colonial precedents.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the audience? Just want to make sure that we're still on time. We still have about 7 minutes. There's one question here for you. Do you think the emphasis on road development is a particularly universal focus of the American colonial officers?
I don't know if it was unique, but it certainly was a focus. And you also need to look at the broader global context of the US at the time, where they've also expanded into the Caribbean. In Puerto Rico, they're building roads. In 1915, when they occupy Haiti, they have a large road building program. So I think it did relate to the kind of resource empire that America was trying to build, and the argument of an influx of capital, of trying to shift economies towards export-oriented growth. I think that roads were seen as a kind of muscular impression of that agenda, where they could actually reproduce space itself to pave the way for the ongoing empire or whatever was to follow.
As you said earlier, Scott, it's also about the material development of the roads that somehow prop up maybe the empire, the American empire, as a way of saying this is the way it should be done now after centuries of being under Spanish occupation. But more than that, also it's a drive towards modernity, as a way of making connections between places that used to be remote or definitely not linked together by a common road. And the common road becomes the that particular space for connection and linkage.
Yeah, and who's to say, a road, who's to argue against a road was sort of the point I made in the beginning. He wants the Filipinos not talking about independence, but building roads, because how can you not look at a road and see progress, right? But at the same time, it's not to say that it's not progress and that some people who are in the right place for these roads are going to benefit from them. So it's
Yeah.
complex.
Right. Are there any questions or comments from the audience? Okay. Any last question? We have 5 more minutes. Okay, well, this kind of parallel with the. There's been a lot of comments about the parallel between the Road Bible and also this current government's own desire to create more infrastructure under the name of nationalism, but it's after that differs in.
Yeah, no, that's
strictly
interesting, the
ideological
way it still can be seen as a way around democratic politics.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe just one call before we formally thank Scott. Maybe this is just a kind of off-the-cuff question for you. I know that you've been to Ann Arbor a lot to gather materials for your book as well as the research we did many, many years ago. But was there a particular kind of information that you maybe found in the archives that kind of particularly resonated with you? Maybe it's included in the book, maybe it's not, but you thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, well, it is fascinating how much material from the Philippines found its way back to these American archives and Midwestern universities and places. But I would have to say, and maybe because it's the last chapter I've completed on roads, the Forbes journals and diaries are just such a fascinating, intimate source, which he supposedly wrote to his mother, but really at a certain point he's keeping for posterity and rationalizing everything he does. But taking on that kind of lens of the biographical through the journals and letters and papers is just kind of intoxicating for me. I love to read it, and I look forward to being finished with this book and just getting back to fresh sources like that. But now I'm just trying to kind of tie it all together.
Maybe this is a weird question to ask at this point, but building up on what you just said, when do you think is the timeline for the publication of this book? Are you thinking early spring maybe, or maybe
well,
early summer?
Yeah, it is kind of forever forthcoming, but no, it really is. I'll have the manuscript completed in the spring, but then it's probably another 9 months or so before it's published. So it's probably not until 2023. Gracious, can that be right? But once it's off my desk, I'll be happy.
Yeah, and there's this comment from Darlene. The Caminero system during those times seemed to establish how roads were really cared for. There was a personal sense of accountability and responsibility attached to caring for one's road, making sure that it was well kept.
Yes,
especially from the Caminero. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, and hello, Darlene. Nice to hear from you. It really was almost compulsive, and in some of these chapters, Forbes would take out visiting dignitaries and like to brag about roads that were so clean you could eat off them. And so it was, I mean, I would almost go so far as to say it was a fetish. But maybe that would be a whole different conference to talk about.
Yeah.
Scott. Nice to see
Sorry,
you.
Scott, you were still saying something?
Oh, no, just that it was, you know, cleanliness in general was an obsession of the American colonials. And I think that carried over to roads and marketplaces and, you know, zoning restrictions. It was a kind of antiseptic model of governance.
Yeah. On a totally unrelated note, Dean Worcester also was keeping great notes about what he did when he came to the country. I was just reading Mark Rice's book again about Dean Worcester's idea of the fantasy islands and how they kept really meticulous notes about everything. So it provided great, to use your metaphor, kind of a roadmap towards understanding life then, right? But at the same time, also recognizing there might be some gaps that may have slipped through.
Yes, exactly.
Well, it's 10:30 p.m. for you, Scott, on a Wednesday night, and it's 10:30 a.m. for us here in Manila. We like to thank you for your time, for your sharing your insights to us, and of course, we're looking forward to the publication of that book, and hopefully a series of tours gonna happen next year in the Philippines, where you could talk about your book more. Maybe any last words before
No, just thank you so much to everybody for listening, and it's great to be here. I do look forward to more in-person interactions in the future, but I'm really excited to be here and be with you on the island of the day before.
On the island, that's right. At this point, I would like to give Scott a certificate of appreciation. The certificate of appreciation is given to Scott Kirsch as plenary speaker at the ICGS 2021 with our theme Geographies of Care, held virtually on November 4. Well, of course, November 3 for you, but you know, 2021 at the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy, UP Diliman, Quezon City, signed by two of our ICGS coordinators, Bernardo Arellano III and Fernand Francis Hermoso, also by yours truly as chair of the department and the president of the PGS, Emmanuel Garcia. So thank you very much, Scott, for your time.
Thank you so much.